Hey guys, I'm going to go over this first page of The Road with you. It's page 3. And point out some things that I would mark as I was going along, patterns, etc. I've given you an annotation sheet. It's just a guide. You can annotate that way if you'd like. If you've learned another way to annotate with any of your sophomore teachers last year, that's fine too. But I know not all of you were necessarily given a way to do that, so that's what that sheet's for. So in this first line, when he woke in the woods in the dark, in the cold of night, he'd reached out to touch the child sleeping behind him. So first we have when woke in woods. So McCarthy starts with alliteration. The purpose we're not sure yet, but that's what he starts with. Nights dark beyond darkness and days more gray each one than what had gone before. So you start to see this pattern, right, of darkness, night, darkness, gray, which will eventually develop into a motif of darkness. Like the onset of some cold glaucoma dimming away the world. Glaucoma is important that in that simile, that diction right there is explaining how their sight has been changed, and you'll see that throughout the text, so it's a good setup for the whole novel. His hand rose and fell softly with each precious breath. So in comparison to what he's describing the setting, he describes precious breath in relation to the child, so to a certain extent that's characterization and how he views the child. He pushed away the plastic tarpaulin and raised himself in the stinking robes and blankets and looked toward the east for any light, but there was none. So you also have here stinking robes and blankets, right? So you have some olfactory imagery. You also have east is not capitalized. When we talk about a direction like the East Coast, we would capitalize it because it's a place. But because he's saying he looks east, it's a very general, it's just the direction. It's like he has no direction to go in that way. And that's important since he's on a journey. In the dream from which he'd wakened, he'd wandered in a cave where the child led him by the hand, their light playing over the wet flowstone walls. Like pilgrims in a fable, swallowed up and lost among the inward parts of some granitic beast. Again, granitic, that would be a word that you would want to look up if you didn't know what it meant. Deep stone flues where the water dripped and sang. Again, we have auditory imagery right here. Water dripped and sang. Tolling in the silence, the minutes of earth and the hours and the days of it and the years without cease, until they stood a great stone room where lay a black and ancient lake, and far off and on the far shore a creature that raised its dripping mouth from the rimstone pool and stared into the light with eyes dead white and sightless. So eyes dead white, there you have visual imagery with the color. You also have visual imagery up here with the gray. You'll see a motif of color in this. You have like pilgrims in a fable swallowed up and lost among the inward parts is a simile. And again, you would want to look at the diction of both the word pilgrims and the idea of a fable. A pilgrim is someone that's going on some kind of religious journey. So think about that as you're reading forward. And a fable, right, is a story where you learn a lesson in the end. And I think both of those things, those word choices are important. Setting the stage for, is this man and this boy, are they on a religious journey? Are they about to learn a lesson? What's happening here as far as the setting goes? The other thing I want to note is silence. Silence is also auditory imagery. So this applies to both of these. You'll see a motif of silence in a lot of books, but silence is super important as well. You also have minutes, hours, days, and you start to see a pattern of time, which could develop into a motif as well. He mentions a couple different places, stone. He also says Black Lake, so you have that visual imagery as well. He describes again the creature as sightless, and that goes back to glaucoma. You have the connection between sightless and glaucoma. Now, I know it would take you, hours to read several pages and mark it like this. But what I want you to see is that when you read several pages, if you see words that are similar over and over again, like darkness, night, stones, or references to time, then you can start marking significant lines where this applies. Again, some of the other figurative language similes you always want to mark. Very poignant imagery you always want to mark as well. I'd also like to note that that it says here, child led him by the hand. That also goes back to the reference of the child in the beginning, and perhaps some characterization, the influence that the child has over him. So when we move on to page 4, the sightless creature, he's comparing his eyes to the eggs of spiders. It swung its head low over the water, as if to see the scent of what it could not see. Crouching there pale and naked and translucent, its alabaster bones, again, very specific diction, cast up in the shadow on the rocks behind it, its bowels, its beating heart, the brain that pulsed in a dull glass bell. It swung its head from side to side and then gave a low moan and turned and lurched away and loped soundlessly into the dark. So again, we have some auditory imagery here with moan and soundlessly. I also want to note the syntax of his sentences. Often they're short, like the brain that pulsed in its dull glass bell. He does that in a lot of his paragraphs. He'll have short, quick sentences. And there's a purpose behind that. You just have to decide based on the paragraph itself, why is that important. With the first gray light, he rose and left the boy sleeping and walked out to the road and squatted and studied the country to the south. Again, no specific destination. Barren, silent, godless. He thought the month was October, but he wasn't sure. He hadn't kept a calendar for years. They were moving south. There'd be no surviving another winter here. So we have 2 more references to time, really 3. October, years, and winter. You also have another reference, obviously to south, like I said. And this tells you a lot about setting, that they've been moving for quite a while. When it was light enough to see the binoculars, he glassed the valley below, everything paling away into the murk, the soft ash blowing in loose swirls over the black top. He studied what he could see, the segments of road down there among the dead trees, looking for anything of color, any movement, any trace of standing smoke. He lowered the glasses and pulled down the cotton mask from his face and wiped his nose on the back of his wrist. And then glassed the country again. Then he just sat there holding the binoculars and watching the ashen daylight congeal over the land. He knew only that the child was his warrant. He said, "If he is not the word of God, God never spoke." So this is the first time that the man actually speaks. So you have his thoughts previously with characterization, but this line is important because it's the first time he says anything. You have the reference to ashen, like before. You see the responsibility he has as a father. And then down here at the bottom of page 4, you see murk. You see smoke, dead trees, the soft ash blowing, swirls over the black top. That's visual imagery. So it's definitely giving you the setting in this section, and the idea, all of those words put together, giving you the idea of how dead everything is. Especially because the paragraph before that, he tells you it's not winter. So if he thinks it's October and winter's not there yet and everything is as barren as it is that he's looking out at, that's important because you know something's happened. So what you are to do as you read, again, do you have to mark every single thing? No. But if you're truly deeply analyzing a page, and that page itself you are, and what you have to look at is like how does that affect, as you keep reading, how does that characterization affect anything else? The reference over here on page 5 to what the man says, if he is not the word of God, God never spoke, in reference to his child. Remember on page 3, they were referenced as pilgrims. So now he references God. Does that mean that this is a religious journey for him of some kind? We don't know yet because we haven't read that far. But it's definitely setting up that idea for you. So as you read, look for patterns, look for unique diction, look for similes, look for things that you think could be symbols, individual things that, or objects, ideas that seem to represent more than what they just are. And your assignment will include doing an in-depth look at one of the pages from your reading.